we move back over to Chuck Crosby of the Crosby Law Office. So Amy asks a very interesting question. Chuck, Brad, Greg, we use a lot of terms on the air. Sometimes we don't go into the details of what those terms really are because we hear them every day, but we sometimes our listeners are curious, what do they mean? So Chuck, Amy is saying she's heard us talk about easements on the radio. She's wondering what exactly is an easement and how does it affect the property or property value of the home she's thinking about buying?
Well, easements, I can't tell you about property value. That's more an appraiser or a realtor's bailiwick. But an easement is permission to use the property. Keep in mind, we always hear that possession is 9/10 of the law. Well, if you imagine a bundle of sticks, say 10 sticks that create the ownership of a piece of property, possession is probably 9 of those sticks. It's an awful lot. But an easement, it doesn't give them the property. You still own the property, but you're allowing them to use the property. Things like utilities. There's always utility easements. You give a utility easement to LG&E. It lets them come through and dig the place up and put their lines in and all that kind of thing. Also prevents you from building on top of it and things like that. So obviously a utility easement is going to be a great thing. But there are other types of easements. Let's say that your property is behind another property and you need to get across it to get to a road. Well, you can get an easement across the property for ingress and egress, that kind of thing. So there's all kinds of easements, but in short, it's just permission to use the property for a stated purpose. Now you can have easements that last forever, that run with the land, or you can have them for a limited period of time. Like I'm going to build a house back there. You're going to let me use this particular part of your property to drive my trucks over to get the materials in. That would typically have an ending date. But a utility easement, not typically. It runs with the land, we call it.
And you can negotiate a price for that easement?
Yeah, a lot of times you can. Yeah. Let's say that you don't do a survey when you're putting in a pool and your pool sits over a little bit. Well, chances are your neighbor's going to say, hey, how much is it worth to you to have an easement to keep your pool on this property? And then go from there.
Yep. And just remember, the other question, a part of this real quickly, Amy, as we wrap up, is the fact that it won't have any effect or impact on the value of your property as long as it doesn't prohibit or encroach on the enjoyment and use of the property. I think that's, Greg, you would think that's probably the way to sum it up, right?
Yeah, unless you actually, here in my neighborhood, Norton Commons, or any multi-unit development that have 0 lot lines, it's customary for, you can have a negotiated price, but to ease your inactive side. So a lot of the planning codes will have an active and an inactive side of your home, one where you have like a walkout or a side porch. And it's customary in this neighborhood, at least, to ease that over to your neighbor so that you can run a fence up to the side of their home, or you can, have fair use of that side of the yard. Now, however, I have seen disputes where they don't run with the land and say your neighbor, let's say I have a fence connected to my neighbor's home and my neighbor sells. I have seen instances where the new owner will not, they'll not agree to this new easement and they'll take ownership and they'll give you a notice on them wanting to rip your fence out and or have it, redone on your lot line. And now that comes to, we always talk about baking a pie and being a good neighbor and negotiating, but I've seen it go to legalese where there's disputes that happen.
We call that Chuck Crosby diplomacy.
Absolutely.
But whenever you do an easement by hug and handshake, that sort of diplomacy may not work in the future.
You need it in writing. We got you.
Yeah, always. A short pencil is better than a long memory.
And Chuck Crosby is just the guy to have that short pencil in hand and ready to help you. As we wrap up, our thanks to Chuck at the Crosby Law Offices, 499-6360. Also, Brad Lawler, owner of Home Team Inspection Service, 844-411-TEAM. My thanks to my son, Greg, who I'm very proud of, does our marketing photography. And if you're thinking of selling, folks, anytime you can reach out to me for this year, next year, beyond. Free, no obligation analysis. We can talk by phone or in person. Really, I'm more than happy to come out. You can reach me 376-5483 or go to bobsellslouisville.com.